first time I've been here, so I had a little walk around before, and it's really, really lovely, so much appreciated. I do have the world's longest talk title, so I've kind of closed it down to closing and expanding authority gaps with hyper-relevant digital PR. But first off, there we go, a little bit about me. So, yeah, my name's Amanda. I am the owner and director of Cedarwood Digital. We've just celebrated our 10th birthday, so I've been going for around about 10 years now. My background, so I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. I came over here about 15 years ago. I'm a qualified journalist by trade, so I've kind of made the move from journalism into SEO into PR, so it's quite handy really when it comes to digital PR. I put 15 plus years because I feel like 20 years really ages me a little bit. So we'll go with somewhere between 15 and 20 years at this point. And in terms of us as an agency, we do specialise predominantly in what we call your money or life or regulated sectors. So when I'm talking today really about niche digital PR, this is a lot of what we're doing in these particular sectors. So sectors that are really, really competitive, where we need to get that advantage over clients. This is something that tends to work really well. So to start off with, you guys are probably sick to death of hearing about how much the SEO landscape has changed in the last 12, 24 months, 6 months, 2 months, but it really has. So, we've gone from a space where 24 months ago we were looking at a traditional SERP, so, sort of 10 blue links, as you would say it, with, potential little bit of interruption from Google Ads as they moved from 2 to 3 to 4 ads. And in the last 24 months, that has wholly changed. So, we've gone from traditional SERPs, we've now got these AI overviews, these AI overlays. In some instances now, particularly in the US and rolling out in the UK, we've got just like whole AI chat. So, particularly if you're on your phone and you type something in, you end up in a kind of conversation with a robot that takes you away from the traditional SERP altogether. And in many cases, we have citation sources, so things like large language models, ChatGPT. I'm not sure how many of you use ChatGPT or talk to it. I read a statistic the other day that said around about 25% of under 25-year-olds say it's their best friend. That's a little bit alarming. I then found myself talking to it as I was going on a walk with my dog, and I thought, do I need to check myself here? But it was okay. It did have a pretty handsome voice, so I feel like that kind of got me over the line. But basically what I'm trying to get at here is that things are very different in the world of SEO now, and traditional SEO techniques are not necessarily going to work. So we need to do something that is a little bit different. And we've seen this a lot in SEO in the last 24 months because we've seen a lot of websites where there's great content, there's kind of great technical SEO, we've maybe gone ahead and built some links, but rankings are very much plateauing. We're not really getting anywhere. And more than that, we've had a lot of clients come to us in the last 12 months with a graph, an organic traffic graph that looks something like this. It's kind of like this sort of steady decline, and it kind of bottoms out and it doesn't really go anywhere. More than ever we're seeing this. So traditionally when we saw a drop in SEO performance, we'd attribute it to like an algorithm update. But now we're seeing this kind of more considered steady decline, and then obviously that bottoming out at the bottom. And the reason that we're seeing this, both of these instances really, more than anything, is because we're hitting what's called a trust threshold. So now with all the changes that are coming into SEO, what we're finding more than ever is that Google and LLMs and AI, it needs trust. It needs to understand who we are, and it needs to understand, most importantly, why we're the right company, the right business, the right entity to be giving the right answers. This is particularly true in your money or life sectors, things like healthcare, things like finance, things that are regulated, things that can have a pretty substantial impact on someone's life if they're not done properly. And it's something that's very, very important today. So in a lot of these instances, what we're finding is that people are putting a lot of content on the website, they're doing some great technical SEO, the website's doing really, really well, but it's not breaking through. And it's not breaking through because Google doesn't trust it. LLMs don't trust it. It's just fundamentally not trusted. There's not enough external touch points. There's not enough being said about that business. They can't find enough information about it in the entity graph, and so on and so forth. And because of that, digital PR or off-site SEO, depending on which way you look at it, requires a slightly more targeted approach. Now, historically, when it came to link building, and I think the other thing we could probably say in the last 12 to 24 months is that link building has become a more important part of SEO. Personally, maybe because we do a lot of it, I've always felt it to be pretty important, but I think now so more so than ever, link building in digital PR is very important in allowing companies to kind of break through that trust threshold. Historically, it was just about whatever you could get. And to be fair, if you work in iGaming, this is very much still the approach. Get whatever you can, see what happens. But now, that doesn't work anymore. Because when we're trying to build a trust threshold and we're trying to kind of pass that trust threshold, we really need to showcase that we know exactly what we're talking about, the topic that is relevant to us. So now when we think about digital PR, we're putting the topic at the center and we're starting to build links around that. We're also trying to fill those authority gaps. So one of the reasons that a lot of companies can't break through this trust threshold is because one element of their authority doesn't exist, or there's a gap in there. And there's 3 different ways you can look at authority gaps. So domain, that's sort of very traditionally how strong your website is. Entity, so that is the awareness of your website, the actual kind of how it exists within the space. So do people know about it? What are other people saying about it, etc., etc. And topical authority, so are you as relevant, are you as cited, do you have as much expertise in the topic that you're talking about against other competitors that are returning in that particular search result. Now, when it comes to digital PR, there's a number of ways that we can go about kind of fixing those authority gaps, let's say. And the main purpose of fixing those authority gaps, obviously, is to break through that trust threshold and get our websites performing. Now, the first way a lot of people do it is through link gap analysis. This is a pretty traditional technique that we do within digital PR. But fundamentally, it only tells a part of the story. And if we're using tools like Ahrefs or SEMrush, it can be very, very linear in terms of what it returns. We need more than that. So the main issue that we have with traditional link gap tools is they are, like I said, very linear. They pull basic backlink data. It compares, like the number of domains linking that you have to a competitor. It doesn't take into account any kind of context or what the topic is about or anything like that. It shows basic link metrics like things like DR and traffic. Everything's generally ranked by a link metric, and you need a bit of manual analysis. We use what we call a custom GPT link analyzer, and one of the things that we've done at Cedarwood in the last 12 months is built a number of custom GPTs to help us with this. The reason that we do this is because we combine the data that we get from tools like Ahrefs and SEMrush with natural language processing or semantics that things like ChatGPT and IBM Watson can provide us, and we basically take that link gap analysis to the next level. So by doing this, essentially what we can do is we can combine all that backlink data with things like journalist coverage and topical context. We can then filter those opportunities by topic cluster and publication relevance. We can then analyze the article context and sentiment and understand why competitors are earning that coverage. Excuse me. We can score opportunities based on that relevance, and then we can summarize those gaps. And essentially what we're doing here is we're taking what is traditional link gap analysis and we're feeding it into those authority gaps. So we're starting to understand, okay, this is where the link gap exists, but actually these are the topics, this is the content, these are the niches, and these are the areas that we need to be building links to help to fill those gaps in. We can do it in a number of ways. So the way that we do it is we basically take a mass grab of the Ahrefs backlink profile. We put it into the custom GPT and we ask it to filter them by niche. So in this particular example, this is for a financial services client. We input our client's profile and we input 6 competitor profiles. We then basically get it to group it by niche. So we've got things like tech and digital, finance, business, trade, etc. And we ran our clients' links against our competitor links. What we're able to see here is where the biggest link gap exists. So we're not just understanding like what domains, what domain rank, what domain authority, they're sort of very basic metrics. What we're understanding here is which niches or which topics our competitors are covering and therefore ranking well for that we don't have the same level of coverage. We're also going one step further and starting to understand what types of content our competitors are getting covered. So in tech and digital, we can see it's things like news, digital innovation sites, IT resources. For finance, we can see it's things like from lenders, comparison sites and credit advice platforms. And for business and trade, we can see it's on things like B2B, SMEs and trade portals. So we're already starting to get some ideas of not just where those gaps exist, but also how we can actually go about filling them in. And this is a really, really nice way to start kind of closing those authority gaps and also building them, because we can say, okay, well actually in this particular sector we're not doing too badly. How do we then go about building that out and improving it? We can also use this approach to essentially score competitors against each other. So if you have one competitor that's ranking particularly well for, let's say, one topic or one keyword cluster and another competitor that's ranking well for another topic or keyword cluster, you can basically map them out against each other and you can start to understand, okay, well they're doing particularly well in this particular niche. So it might be that that's where we want to close that gap. For example, on this list you can see sort of client 2, for example, is doing a lot better in business and trade. Comparison directories. Client 4 again is doing quite well in that. So if you get to a situation where a specific client is performing well in one of those sectors, then it's really worth having a look at it off the back of that as well. And that just sort of guides your line of theory from an authority gap perspective. In terms of identifying that, it's one piece of the puzzle. We then obviously need to go about building it. So authority comes from a number of different ways. It comes from coverage, and that's fairly straightforward from a PR perspective. It comes from expert commentary. It also comes from mentions, and I know a lot of the time we're having this conversation with clients, they only want a link, they only want to do follow link. That tends to be the kind of battle, but actually mentions are really, really important in terms of building that authority, that external trust, and that entity graph that Google's looking for. And also these semantic connections, so being able to connect together your website with other websites through things that are topically linked and topically relevant as well. And with our digital PR, we want to keep it with that level of hyper-relevance. So in PR, you'll do a number of different approaches. So your generic PR, which is where you might be outreaching to things like nationals, potentially some regionals, just to get a bit of coverage, build that baseline for the brand. Relevant PR, so that's where you start to target kind of more niche publications, things that might be more relevant to your audience. And finally, the kind of sweet spot for these authority gaps, which is a hyper-relevant PR, which is essentially where you're targeting hyper-relevant publications with hyper-relevant content. You're building that really nice niche, and you're starting to close those niche gaps that we've previously identified. And as a result of this, you also really want to be focusing on that relevant coverage. So when we went back to the graph before and we looked at the fact that traditionally we just used to build links, in the same way we just kind of used to get coverage. Coverage anywhere was pretty nice. We're talking years and years ago. Now we want it to be as semantically linked as possible. So here in the center we have the client, we have the topic, and around it all of these pieces of PR that we're building and all of these citations and all of these mentions, we want to have them as topically and semantically linked as we can, to make sure that all of the information they're giving us is giving those signals about why we're an expert on a particular topic or sector. A good example of this from the property sector. So for one of our property clients, we created 54 hyper-relevant links in year one, plus a bunch of coverage on top of that. We focused on publications that were really relevant to them, so things like Fix Radio, Property Reporter, Property Wire, House Beautiful, etc. They all had reasonable domain ranks. We actually found as a byproduct of that many of them had good do-follow links. This isn't something that we specifically target, but does help from an SEO perspective. A lot of that was because they were trade niches, niche publications. We did this for our clients, and literally within the first year they got a 300% traffic increase off the back of that. It really does work from a niche acquisition perspective, and of course it's also really nice for the client because they feel like we're getting them published in front of their audience, in front of people that actually might want to engage with the brand or the specific product. And the main reason we did this is by building authority clusters. So we essentially put that brand at the center of the conversation. We built a range of kind of coverage from industry publications. With this particular client, we didn't actually target any nationals or regionals at all. Regional links in themselves are becoming more difficult to come across. They're not really getting syndicated, like we're finding more challenges with that anyway. But with this client, we just purely built 54 industry publication links. Some of them were repeated, so some of them had multiple articles in the same publication over, let's say, a period of a year. But it worked really well to kind of build that topical authority, and we were able to build that gap against a competitor, which in turn worked really well. This also matters for AI, and the main reason is because these systems, or AI systems, are things like LLMs and GPTs, they rely on dependable patterns. So if we're building links from niche sources and AI starts to understand, okay, this website is commonly linked with this other website that is topically relevant, or it's commonly cited in these publications that are, again, topically relevant to it, that's a dependable pattern that can help the LLM and the AI to start build trust. Same from Google's perspective. It's brands that are repeatedly authoritative, so for the same reason they love it. It builds consistency and authority, and the relevance also helps to kind of build that connection for AI. So as long as AI is able to crawl your website and the websites that you're getting published on, this again is a really nice way to also help your GEO on top of your SEO. So with all of that said, I'm going to give you a quick framework that is essentially 5 steps to closing and expanding authority gaps to boost your performance that kind of ties all of that together. So first off, as I mentioned before, make sure you're identifying those authority gaps. And the way you can do this, analysing competitors and competitor topics, so having a look at what topics your competitors are covering, having a look at things like publication frequency, how frequently they're publishing on certain different domains and topics, audit your external visibility, and then identify those gaps. So look at things like topical gaps, journalist gaps, editorial gaps. Use things like ChatGPT to help you. Use the natural language processing to help more semantically understand the themes of those link gaps and those link profiles, and start building yourself out topics that look at things like, how many links you've got versus your competitor and where that link gap actually exists. It'll help you to understand what kind of topics you want to brainstorm, and therefore what kind of content you want to publish off the back of that. Once you've done that, you then want to map your topical authority. So take the authority that you've got and start looking at what kind of content your competitors have published. So add in your description side of things. Step away from the pure numbers. You've looked at your numbers in the first step. In your second step, you want to understand where those links and those gaps are actually going to be built. So, again, if you're looking at things like entertainment and gaming, looking at things like culture and entertainment outlets cover finance through lifestyle, games, pop culture, etc., etc. You're getting loads and loads of good ideas here. By mapping your authority, when you go into ideation, you're already giving the team a really good idea of what kind of topics they want to be covering, and you're making yourselves much more precise in the work that you're doing. Your content's more likely to land. You then want to prioritize your niche publications, but what I would say to this is you also want to find a nice mix. So a lot of the clients that we work with in regulated sectors, they tend to be things like comparison websites or iGaming publications, etc. They are always like, not too worried about those top tier publications, just focus on the niche, focus on the niche. But we always say to them, it's great if it gets syndicated out to a top tier publication. That's good because you're going to get a really good high domain rank off the back of that. So make sure that you're not excluding things, like don't just focus on niche, obviously prioritize it to close the gap, but definitely don't rule out going to national press or regional press. Again, many of the comparison companies that we work with, we'll ask them if we can go to national press with if we've got a really good niche story that we think will be picked up by national press, we'll suggest to them we would take it to that, and that will help to kind of build that overall entity authority as well. So yes, you obviously do want your large news sites in there, but fundamentally the scales are going to be tipped in the favour of the industry publications. Number 4, build your entity associations. So what you really want to do is make sure that your brand is associated with 2 very core entities. First off is a level of expertise. So you want to make sure that the content that you're putting out there, the PR that you're showcasing and everything that you're talking about the brand is showcasing that expertise, both the expertise of you and the expertise of the brand itself. And secondly, that entity association of the topic. So in addition to showcasing your expertise, that expertise needs to be relevant to the topic, the product, the service, whatever it is that your brand is talking about, whatever it is that your brand specializes in. We work with a mattress client, and one of the main things that we've worked on in terms of building entity expertise is actually improving the expertise and knowledge of one of our in-house experts. So we have a sleep expert. She's brilliant. She knows everything about sleep. It's blown my mind actually working with them for the last year. I've learned so much about sleep that I didn't know and maybe didn't want to know either. And we've worked really, really hard to build up her profile, and as a result of that, building some really strong links into her actual expert page. So things like Huffington Post, Tom's Guide, Glamour Magazine, GQ, Telegraph, etc., etc. As a byproduct of this, we're not just strengthening the entity authority of the mattress website, we're actually strengthening the entity authority of her, and as a byproduct, her association with that website. And that's working really, really well for them as well, because since we started doing this over the last year, that entity association has driven about a 64% organic traffic year-on-year increase. Now that has been combined with obviously some slightly more broader digital PR work, but our main focus has been on building that kind of expertise entity trust, and that is something that has worked really, really well for them. And finally, data-led PR. So data-led PR is a fantastic way to get niche links, because the content that you're producing is definitely going to be topically relevant, because it's going to be data that's relevant to your brand, or more importantly, it's going to be data that's about your brand. A couple of examples of where this has worked really well. A piece that we did for one of our vaping clients around illegal vape seizures. So we did freedom of information requests across the UK to understand what areas had had the most illegal vape seized by UK councils. We popped it into Data Wrapper, produced a really, really nice little graph down here, which journalists loved, and got some really nice coverage. We did get picked up by The Sun, so that was nice to have a bit of national coverage, but we also got things like Vaping Post and Convenience Store off the back of that. The beauty of this data-led campaign, the data is hyper-relevant to the client, and as you can imagine, most publications don't want to talk about vaping, so we had to find something that was both relevant to our client and also relevant to the public interest, or to have a bit of interest that people would actually want to cover it. We also did a piece for our property client on roofing complaints. So we essentially, again, looked at a range of different data sources to understand how many roofing complaints there had been in the UK and sort of what home maintenance areas were most complained about, let's say more than that. Similar to previously what I'd shown you, so we got things like Fix Radio, we got PHAM News, we got Roofing Today, we got Insight DIY. So again, lots and lots of lovely niche publications there. Again, using data that we know is hyper-relevant to the topic, hyper-relevant to the brand, and therefore is going to be well received by the audience. And we also did a piece for a medical legal client where we analysed a range of Quality Care Commission reports. So these reports looked into how people had been treated around rights for an in-person GP appointment. We took a load of data together. We basically analysed waiting times and things sort of similar. We got a comment from our client, sort of an expert comment, and then we also outreached that to a range of publications. This took more of a mainstream approach, but what it did was it tied our client very, very closely to the topic that they were very passionate about, which in this instance was medical negligence. The beauty about niche link building, you're probably like, what is that? It's a snowball compounding, just to kind of clarify, how it gets bigger as it picks up things along the way. The beauty about niche publications is that it does exactly that, it compounds. So the more niche publications that you get, the more topical relevancy you get, the more you're able to build your entity, the more you're able to build your awareness, kind of the better it gets for you and your company, and ultimately it gets to kind of this point where you have what we call a brand moat. So your brand sits in the middle and it has this whole coverage ecosystem that goes around it. So it has all of the niche topics that has been covered, it has all your citations, it has all your mentions, it has all your links, it has everything going into it. And it's got also all of those entity associations, so things like your expertise, things like your authority, things like your topical relevance. All of those things are fed into it, and what you're ultimately doing is building this brand and building this authority. And by doing that, to go back to the start of the presentation, that's what's enabling you to kind of break through that trust ceiling. So once you've established this whole brand ecosystem, that trust ceiling doesn't become a problem anymore, because all of a sudden you've got all of these things that are signaling to Google and to AI. That's not a problem. You've got that trust and it exists within the ecosystem. So finally, a couple of key takeaways. Authority gaps do suppress rankings. It's quite widely known, and I think it is one of the biggest issues that companies have faced in the last 12 to 24 months. Hyper-relevant PR, though, as a result of that, does help to close them. Building authority clusters will strengthen those signals, so that ties back to that kind of brand moat slide that we had before. Building those authority clusters is very important. And finally, that precision does beat volume. So particularly with that initial property case study, what we found was that even though we generated a much lower number of links than competitors over that space, particularly larger competitors, we were able to much improve performance. That's a terrible way of wording it. To better improve performance over that time, because what we were producing was much more relevant and much more suited to the website. Thank you very much for having me. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or ask any questions if you've got any.